Hello, everyone. Tonight we are going to get you very, very lost. Imagine you are standing in the middle of a jungle, so impossibly green and alive, it feels like it's breathing on you. The air is thick, a hot, wet blanket you can't throw off, and the noise of insects is a constant, high-pitched static in your ears. Strange birds call from unseen branches, and the scent of damp earth and sweet rotting fruit is everywhere. This is the island of Flores in Indonesia, and if you were dropped here 75,000 years ago with nothing but the clothes on your back, you probably won't survive this. You'd be a snack for a dragon, a plaything for a giant rat, or simply a victim of your own inability to find a single edible plant that doesn't look exactly like its lethally poisonous cousin. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy what I do here. Invite viewers to post their location and local time. I find it fascinating to see where you're all listening from as we wander through these ancient worlds together. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward, pushing aside a massive waxy leaf that immediately slaps back, showering you with lukewarm droplets of yesterday's rain. The humidity is doing things to your hair that science has yet to properly document, creating a kind of personal frizzy ecosystem on your head. Through a break in the dense foliage, you see it. It's not a structure, not a building, but a profound absence in the side of a jungle-choked limestone hill. A mouth. A vast, dark, unblinking mouth gaping open into the earth. This is Liang Bua, the cool cave, and it's the stage upon which our entire story will unfold. You stand at its entrance for a long moment, catching your breath. The scale of it is humbling. The opening is over 100 feet wide and 80 feet high, an immense archway that could swallow a modern office building whole and still have room for dessert. The air that drifts out from its depths is a welcome relief from the oppressive jungle heat, carrying the cool mineral scent of damp stone and something else, something ancient and dusty. As you step across the threshold, the world changes. The deafening buzz of the jungle fades, replaced by an echoing quiet. The light shifts from the bright, oppressive green of the canopy to a soft, dim gray that filters in from the entrance. Your footsteps, silent on the mossy ground outside, now crunch softly on the cave floor, each sound magnified by the colossal space. You feel a drip of water on your shoulder, impossibly cold, and look up. The ceiling is a lost world of its own, a landscape of stalactites hanging like stone icicles, some massive and thick, others delicate as needles. Far above, you can hear the faint, fluttering chirps of swiftlets and bats, the cave's permanent residents. It's a quirky fact that some species of swiftlet here build their nests almost entirely from their own gummy saliva. These nests, harvested for bird's nest soup, have been a part of the regional economy for centuries, a strange intersection of cave ecology and fine dining. For a moment, you're just a tourist marveling at a natural wonder, half expecting to find a souvenir stand selling t-shirts that say, "My ancestors went to Liang Bua, and all I got was this lousy stalactite." You walk deeper into the main chamber. The floor isn't flat. It's a gently sloping surface of packed earth and rockfall, the product of millennia of slow, patient accumulation. You are walking on time itself. Every inch of dust, every pebble, every layer of sediment beneath your feet is a page from a history book written in a language of geology and decay. For thousands of years, this place was a home, a shelter for the ancestors of the modern Manggarai people who live in the area today. They used this cave, slept here, cooked here, and left their own marks on its history. But they were not the first, not by a long shot. Long before any modern human sought shelter here, back when the Dutch East India Company was first making its presence known in the Indonesian archipelago in the 17th century, a legitimate historical event that utterly transformed the region through the spice trade. This cave was already ancient, already holding its secrets. The Dutch traders and colonists, obsessed with nutmeg and cloves, had no idea that a discovery lay sleeping under the earth of this particular island that would one day force us to question the very definition of what it means to be human. They sailed right past their minds on commerce, completely oblivious to the paleontological gold mine just a few miles inland. You crouch down and run your hand over the cool, silty ground. It feels inert, just dirt. But it's not. It's a matrix, a time capsule. For decades, archaeologists knew this cave was important, a site of intermittent human occupation. But for a long time, historians still debate whether the early archaeological focus was too narrow, concentrating primarily on the upper layers associated with our own species. No one was truly prepared for what lay deeper. No one was looking for a ghost. The acoustics in here are strange. A single cough could probably echo for a week, like a bad opening act that just won't leave the stage. You imagine the archaeologists who would eventually come here, their trowels scraping gently, their conversations bouncing off the immense silent walls. They were looking for the trail of modern humans, a straightforward story of migration and settlement. What they found instead was a fairy tale, a myth made real, a creature that wasn't supposed to exist. You are standing at ground zero of a scientific earthquake. The air is still and cool, the silence broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water from the ceiling, each drop a tick of a geological clock. You feel a sense of profound solitude, but also of being watched not by a living thing, but by the immense weight of the past. The story of who we are, where we come from, is not a straight line. It's a tangled, messy tree with branches that lead to dead ends and strange, unexpected places. And this cave, this cool, quiet cathedral of stone, is one of the strangest of them all. You're not just in a cave, you're in a mystery, a place where the rules of human evolution were seemingly broken, rewritten, and then buried for 50,000 years. And the first clues were lying just a few feet below where you now stand. As you continue your imagined journey through the scientific landscape of Flores, the focus shifts from the perplexing smallness of the hobbits themselves to the none other miniature animals that shared their island home. This is where the plot thickens, where the idea of Homo floresiensis as a distinct dwarfed species gains some serious traction. You see, the hobbits weren't alone in their tiny stature. Liang Bua Cave and other sites across Flores have yielded a menagerie of pint-sized prehistoric creatures, a testament to the powerful, often bizarre effects of island isolation. It's like Mother Nature decided to run a controlled experiment in a shrinking machine, and Flores was her laboratory. You'd think that with all this smallness, the island would be perfect for a miniature golf course, though the stegodon might make for some difficult obstacles. Imagine unearthing the bones of pygmy elephants, not the colossal mammoths you see in documentaries about the Ice Age, but a much smaller, more compact version of stegodon, an ancient elephant relative. These weren't just runts. They were fully grown adults standing perhaps only a little taller than a modern-day cow. Their presence alongside the hobbits immediately raised a red flag for those clinging to the diseased Homo sapiens theory. Why would only the humans be afflicted with a growth disorder, while the elephants conveniently also suffered from the same malady? It strains credulity, doesn't it? Historians still debate whether the initial resistance to the new species hypothesis was more about scientific rigor or an almost emotional attachment to the idea of a linear, progressive human evolution. But the miniaturization didn't stop with the elephants. The fossil record of Flores also includes giant rats. And when I say giant, I mean truly impressive cat-sized rodents. And a species of Komodo dragon that, while still formidable, was somewhat smaller than its monstrous modern descendants. And then there are the bird storks that stood nearly 2 meters tall, soaring over the pygmy landscape. It's a topsy-turvy world, a classic example of the island rule in action, where large animals tend to shrink and small animals tend to grow larger. It's almost as if the island itself was a funhouse mirror, distorting the familiar forms of the mainland. You could practically film a quirky nature documentary here featuring a tiny elephant trying to outrun a giant rat. This consistent pattern of faunal dwarfism and gigantism across multiple species on Flores provides a compelling ecological backdrop for the hobbits' small size. It suggests that their diminutive stature wasn't a unique genetic mishap, but rather an evolutionary adaptation, a response to the specific pressures and opportunities presented by an isolated island environment. Think about it: if food resources are limited, being smaller means you need less to survive. If predators are few or absent, the evolutionary pressure to be large for defense diminishes. It's a beautifully elegant explanation linking the fate of the hobbits to the broader ecological processes shaping life on islands. One quirky fact about island ecosystems is that they are particularly vulnerable to introduced species, which can often outcompete or prey upon the unique endemic species leading to rapid extinctions. The discovery of these varied faunal remains cemented the idea that Flores was a microcosm, a living laboratory where evolutionary forces played out in accelerated fashion. The stratigraphic layers within Liangbua Cave tell a clear story. The remains of Homo floresiensis are consistently found alongside the bones of these dwarfed stegodon and other unique island fauna, indicating they coexisted for a significant period. This wasn't just a random assortment of bones. It was an assembled puzzle, each piece fitting perfectly to reveal a picture of a unique ecosystem. A legitimate historical event that helped solidify the acceptance of Homo floresiensis as a distinct species was the publication of the initial findings in the prestigious journal Nature, which then triggered a wave of further research and debate. So when you consider the hobbits, don't think of them in isolation. Imagine them navigating a landscape dotted with miniature elephants, dodging colossal rats, and perhaps even competing for resources with a slightly less terrifying, but still formidable, Komodo dragon. Their small size makes perfect sense within this ecological context. It's not just about what they were, but about where they were. The island of Flores didn't just contain them, it shaped them. It was a crucible of evolution, forging a hominin unlike any other we'd ever encountered, a testament to the incredible adaptability of our lineage. Remember how we talked about the crocodile poop sunscreen? Well, in this environment, you'd probably be more worried about giant rat bites than sunburn. You're now getting a feel for the unique evolutionary pressures at play on Flores. And perhaps the most iconic example besides the hobbits themselves is the story of the elephantine cousins, the dwarf stegodon. Imagine an elephant but shrunk down to the size of a pony, or maybe even a large cow. That's essentially what the stegodon species found on Flores. Stegodon florensis insularis became. This isn't just some random quirk. It's a profound illustration of the island rule in action, where large mainland species isolated on islands with limited resources and often fewer predators tend to shrink over generations. It's like your favorite band going acoustic because they can't fit all their amps on the stage. They adapt to their environment. These diminutive elephants were a significant part of the Homo floresiensis ecosystem. Their bones are found alongside the hobbits' remains in Liangbua, painting a vivid picture of a shared co-evolved habitat. The original stegodon species that likely reached Flores was much larger, similar in size to a modern Asian elephant. But over hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, as successive generations bred on the island, natural selection favored smaller individuals. Why? Because smaller animals need less food, require less water, and generally put less strain on the finite resources of an island. If you're a big elephant on a small island, you're going to eat yourself out of house and home pretty quickly. It's a harsh lesson in ecological economics. The evolution of these dwarf stegodon on Flores is a legitimate historical event in the annals of paleontology, a prime example of insular dwarfism. Their presence provides compelling circumstantial evidence supporting the idea that the hobbits too underwent a similar process of evolutionary size reduction. If the island was shrinking its elephants, why not its hominins? Historians still debate whether the specific lineage of stegodon on Flores arrived in a single wave or through multiple dispersal events over geological time. Regardless, the outcome was clear: a miniature pachyderm. You might think a mini elephant would be cute, but remember, even a cow-sized elephant still has tusks and a powerful trunk. It's not something you'd want to playfully tickle behind the ears. This phenomenon isn't unique to Flores, of course. You see evidence of island dwarfism in various forms around the world: dwarf mammoths on Wrangel Island, pygmy hippos on Madagascar, and miniature deer on many isolated landmasses. But the Flores example, with its co-occurrence of dwarf hominins and dwarf proboscideans, is particularly striking because it puts Homo floresiensis firmly within a well-understood evolutionary framework. It tells us that the hobbits weren't necessarily freaks of nature or diseased individuals, but rather successful adapters to a very specific set of environmental circumstances. It's like finding out that the tiny car you saw earlier wasn't a defect, but part of a whole line of compact models designed for city living. The interaction between the hobbits and these dwarf stegodon is a fascinating area of speculation. Did the hobbits hunt them? The evidence suggests they certainly butchered them, as cut marks on stegodon bones have been found in the same layers as Homo floresiensis tools. Imagine a group of meter-tall hominins bringing down a several hundred-kilogram animal. It would have required significant cooperation planning and sophisticated hunting techniques. It wasn't like bringing down a woolly mammoth, but it was still a considerable feat of ancient engineering, if you will. A quirky or off-color fact is that some researchers initially speculated that the stegodon might have been tamed or herded by the hobbits, similar to how modern humans might manage livestock. Though evidence for this remains elusive and highly debated, the mere thought of a hobbit cowboy wrangling a mini elephant is certainly a giggle-worthy image. So the presence and evolution of these dwarf stegodon on Flores didn't just add to the general weirdness of the island's fauna, they provided a crucial piece of the puzzle for understanding Homo floresiensis. They showed that the island was a powerful engine of evolutionary change capable of sculpting creatures into forms perfectly suited for its unique constraints. When you hear about the hobbit's small size, now you can picture them not as outliers, but as part of a larger ecological narrative, sharing their reduced stature with the island's most formidable residents. It truly makes you appreciate the incredible diversity of life and the ingenious ways evolution finds to navigate even the most challenging environments. Now that you've got a grasp on the miniature elephants and other fascinating creatures of Flores, let's zoom out a bit and look at the overarching scientific principle that ties all these strange evolutionary outcomes together. The island rule. This isn't some obscure academic jargon. It's a fundamental ecological concept that helps us understand why isolated islands often become hotbeds of evolutionary oddities. You see, when species colonize an island and become isolated from their mainland counterparts, they're thrust into a very different selective environment. It's like sending a bunch of eager contestants to a reality show where the rules are subtly but profoundly altered. The island rule, sometimes called Foster's rule, essentially states that large animals tend to get smaller on islands' dwarfism, while small animals tend to get larger gigantism. We've already touched on the dwarf stegodon and the giant rats of Flores. This isn't just a coincidence. It's a predictable pattern driven by a few key factors. For larger animals like elephants, or in our case, ancestral hominins, islands often present limited food resources and less diverse habitats. Being big is energy-intensive, requiring a lot of sustenance. On a finite island, those who are slightly smaller who need less to survive have a significant advantage. They're more likely to reproduce and pass on their small genes, leading to a gradual reduction in size over many generations. It's natural selection doing what it does best, optimizing for the local conditions. Imagine trying to park an SUV in a tiny crowded city. Eventually, you'd wish you had a compact car. Conversely, for small animals like rodents or reptiles, islands often lack their typical predators from the mainland. Without constant pressure from hungry hawks or snakes, there's less need to stay tiny and hidden. In fact, being a bit larger might offer advantages like better competitive ability for food or mates. So over time, these smaller creatures can evolve to be bigger, sometimes dramatically so. This is why Flores had its giant rats and outsized storks. Historians still debate whether the specific mechanisms driving these size changes are solely related to resource availability and predator absence, or if other factors like temperature and competition play equally significant roles. The island rule isn't just a theory. It's been observed in countless island ecosystems around the world, from the dwarf mammoths of Wrangel Island off Siberia to the giant tortoises of the Galapagos. It's a legitimate historical event in evolutionary biology, a well-established principle that provides a powerful framework for interpreting fossil discoveries on islands. When the first Homo floresiensis bones were found, the idea of island dwarfism immediately became a leading explanation for their diminutive size, precisely because it fit this broader, well-documented pattern. It was like finding a piece of a puzzle and realizing it belonged to a much larger familiar picture. This rule emphasizes the power of isolation as an evolutionary engine. When populations are cut off from gene flow with mainland populations, they begin to evolve independently, adapting specifically to their new, unique environment. This can lead to the development of highly endemic species, those found nowhere else on Earth. The hobbits are a prime example of this endemic isolation. They represent a branch of our family tree that took a truly unique evolutionary path shaped by the distinct pressures of their island home. You might find it a quirky or off-color fact that on some scientists have even proposed using artificial islands or isolated environments as arcs for endangered species to encourage unique evolutionary adaptations. Though this idea remains largely theoretical and controversial due to ethical concerns and unpredictable outcomes. So as you continue to picture the ancient world of Flores, understand that the smallness of the hobbits wasn't some random genetic fluke. It was a direct consequence of the island rule, a predictable, powerful evolutionary force that reshaped not just the elephants, rats, and storks of Flores, but also, quite remarkably, our own hominin relatives. It tells us that evolution is incredibly flexible, capable of producing astonishing diversity, and that sometimes shrinking can be the ultimate survival strategy. Having grasped the broad strokes of the island rule, let's now drill down into one of its primary driving forces, particularly for larger animals like our hobbits, the phenomenon of limited resources. Imagine being stranded on a desert island, not just for a few days, but for generations. What's the first thing you worry about? Food, water, and shelter right now. Magnify that struggle across an entire population over hundreds of thousands of years, and you begin to understand the immense evolutionary pressure that resource scarcity can exert. It's like a perpetually ongoing high-stakes game of musical chairs, but instead of chairs, it's calories and territory. Flores, despite its lush appearance today, was for the prehistoric inhabitants a relatively constrained environment. It's an island by definition finite. Compared to the vastness of a continent, the total available land area for foraging and hunting is significantly smaller. This means fewer plants to eat, fewer animals to hunt, and less space to spread out. When food is consistently scarce, larger individuals within a population face a significant disadvantage. They need more energy to sustain their bigger bodies, more fuel for their daily activities. If there's not enough to go around, the smaller individuals, who are more efficient in their resource utilization, are more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass on their genes. Over countless generations, this selective pressure consistently favors smaller body sizes. It's a ruthless but effective way for nature to balance a population with its environment. Consider the dwarf stegodon we discussed earlier. A full-sized elephant needs a tremendous amount of vegetation to survive daily. On a small island, such a creature would quickly deplete its food supply, leading to starvation. But a miniaturized stegodon can subsist on far less, making its survival much more probable. The same principle applies to Homo floresiensis. If their ancestral hominin population arrived on Flores at a larger size, the chronic lack of abundant, easily accessible calories would have gradually pruned back the larger individuals. Being a meter tall and relatively light means you need significantly fewer calories than, say, a modern human, allowing you to eke out a living where a larger hominin might starve. You'd probably save a fortune on groceries if ancient Flores had grocery stores. Beyond just food, limited space also plays a role. A smaller body requires less territory to roam, less space for sleeping, and potentially less conflict over prime foraging grounds. Imagine a dozen families trying to survive in a house built for one. Eventually, someone has to move out, or everyone just gets a lot smaller to fit. This isn't just about simple survival, it's about reproductive success. Individuals who are better adapted to the limited resources are more likely to raise offspring, ensuring their genetic legacy. A legitimate historical event that underscores the severity of resource limitation in human history is the Mammoth Year Without a Summer in 1816, caused by the eruption of Mount Tambora, which led to widespread crop failures and famine, globally illustrating how environmental shifts can drastically impact food availability for even large established human populations. Historians still debate whether the specific resource limitations on Flores were primarily driven by food scarcity, water availability, or a combination of environmental factors like volcanic activity periodically altering the landscape. Regardless of the exact blend, the outcome points to a consistent pressure for smaller forms. A quirky or off-color fact is that some researchers have even speculated that the hobbits might have developed highly specialized foraging techniques, perhaps even eating things that larger hominins might consider unpalatable, simply out of necessity. You might scoff, but when hunger truly bites, suddenly those grubs start looking like a five-star meal. So when you think of Homo floresiensis and their surprisingly small stature, remember it wasn't just some random biological twist. Their diminutive size was likely a direct and powerful evolutionary response to the limited resources available on their isolated island home. It was a trade-off sacrifice size for survival, and it worked for hundreds of thousands of years. This demonstrates the incredible adaptive capacity of the human lineage, reminding us that survival often means not just getting bigger or smarter, but sometimes, paradoxically, getting smaller and more efficient. So we've explored how limited resources on Flores push the hobbits and other creatures towards miniaturization. Now let's flip the coin and look at another critical factor in the island rule, the absence of large predators. On a continent, life is a constant brutal negotiation with apex predators. If you're a medium-sized mammal, you're always looking over your shoulder for lions, wolves, saber-toothed cats, or even larger hominins. This constant threat provides a powerful selective pressure for larger body size, greater speed, or enhanced defensive capabilities. Being big offers protection pure and simple, but what happens when those predators are largely missing from the picture? Imagine arriving on an island where the usual terrifying roster of mainland carnivores simply doesn't exist. For Homo floresiensis, or their ancestral population, this would have been a profoundly different world. While Flores did have its share of formidable creatures like the Komodo dragon, which as we noted was somewhat smaller than its modern counterpart and likely less of a direct threat to adult hominins than, say, a pride of lions, it lacked the massive pursuit predators that shaped evolution on the continents. There were no dire wolves, no giant bears, no smilodon. You wouldn't need to be able to outrun a cheetah or fight off a cave bear to survive your morning constitutional. It's like moving to a quiet suburban neighborhood after living in a bustling crime-ridden city. Suddenly, you don't feel the need to carry a baseball bat everywhere you go. Without this relentless pressure from large predators, the evolutionary advantage of being big for defense diminishes significantly. If you don't need to be massive to avoid being eaten, then the benefits of smaller size, like requiring fewer resources, as we just discussed, start to outweigh the costs. This lack of predation pressure can, over many generations, contribute to a reduction in body size. It's a fascinating aspect of island ecology. The ecological release from top-down control allows for different evolutionary pathways. This is a legitimate historical event in ecological studies, with numerous examples of predator-free islands leading to the evolution of flightless birds or particularly docile mammals. Think of the dodo, a famously flightless bird that evolved on predator-free Mauritius, only to be easily hunted to extinction by humans and introduced animals. Hammerfrom. Historians still debate whether the specific types of predators present on Flores before human arrival, like the ancestral Komodo dragon or giant storks, exerted enough pressure to counteract the general trend towards dwarfism, or if their impact was minor compared to continental threats. However, the overall consensus is that the balance of predatory threats was significantly different on Flores. A quirky or off-color fact is that some researchers have even suggested that the Komodo dragons themselves might have experienced a degree of dwarfism compared to their mainland relatives, indicating that even the top predator felt the island's unique selective pressures. It's a bit like a heavyweight boxer going on a diet, because all the other contenders are featherweights. So while you might think of shrinking as a disadvantage in the context of Flores, it made perfect evolutionary sense. The hobbits weren't constantly expending precious energy maintaining a large defensive body. They could dedicate more energy to foraging, to reproduction, to making those clever stone tools. Their smaller size was an adaptation, not a flaw, a testament to how finely tuned evolution can be to a specific environment. You can imagine them moving through the dense Flores jungle, perhaps with a slightly more relaxed demeanor than their mainland cousins, knowing that the biggest thing they probably had to worry about was an occasional giant rat or a grumpy stegodon. The combined forces of wide and limited resources in the absence of large predators formed a powerful duo effectively driving the Hobbit down the path of insular dwarfism. It's a beautiful example of how nature customizes life forms to fit their niche, demonstrating that bigger isn't always better, especially when you're living on a very exclusive, very ancient island. The story of Homo floresiensis isn't just about a strange little hominin. It's a profound lesson in ecological adaptation and the surprising paths evolution can take when given the right conditions. All right, we've covered the environmental pressures that likely sculpted the hobbits into their diminutive forms. Now let's tackle the elephant in the room, or perhaps given our current topic, the tiny stegodon in the room, the brain-size debate. When Homo floresiensis was discovered, the most astonishing aspect, arguably even more so than their small stature, was their incredibly small brain. We're talking a cranial capacity of approximately 380 to 420 cubic centimeters cc. To put that into perspective, your brain is roughly 1,300 cc. A chimpanzee's brain is around 500 cc. So the hobbits had a brain size comparable to a chimpanzee's or even an Australopithecine like Lucian ancestor that lived millions of years before them and was generally considered less cognitively advanced. This fact immediately ignited a firestorm of controversy. For decades, the prevailing narrative in human evolution was one of ever-increasing brain size, directly correlated with increasing intelligence, tool-making abilities, and complex behaviors. Bigger brain, smarter hominin, more advanced culture. It seemed like a neat and tidy progression. The hobbits with their tiny noggins threw a wrench into this well-oiled machine. How could a creature with such a small brain be found alongside sophisticated stone tools, evidence of hunting, and possibly even the use of fire? It challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between brain size and cognitive capacity. It was like discovering that the world champion chess player was actually a hamster. Utterly perplexing. The initial reaction from some corners of the scientific community was skepticism. This led to the alternative theories we'll discuss later, primarily the idea that H.R. Floresiensis wasn't a new species at all, but rather a population of Homo sapiens afflicted with a pathological condition that caused both dwarfism and microcephaly. If they were diseased, then their small brains weren't an evolutionary adaptation, but a developmental abnormality, and the intellectual capacity debate could largely be sidestepped. Historians still debate whether it's the rapid push for pathological explanations was purely scientific or influenced by a reluctance to fundamentally rethink established models of human cognitive evolution. However, subsequent detailed anatomical studies of the Floresiensis brain endocasts, internal molds of the skull that reveal brain shape, showed that despite its small size, its structure was remarkably complex and bore similarities to Homo erectus, a much larger-brained hominin known for its advanced tool-making and widespread dispersal. This suggested that perhaps it wasn't just the sheer volume of the brain that mattered, but its organization and neural wiring. A legitimate historical event that intensified this debate was the discovery of further partial skeletons and remains from Liangbua, consistently showing the same small brain size and body proportions, making the one diseased individual argument increasingly untenable. This raises profound questions about intelligence. Does a smaller brain necessarily mean less intelligence? Or could a small brain, when highly specialized and efficiently wired, achieve complex cognitive tasks? Think about the corvids, crows, and ravens. They have relatively small brains but exhibit incredibly complex problem-solving abilities, tool use, and even social learning. Perhaps the hobbits were the corvids of the hominin world, small-brained but remarkably clever for their size. It's a quirky or off-color fact that some researchers jokingly refer to the H. floresiensis brain as a Ferrari engine in a Fiat body, implying an incredibly efficient and powerful neurological setup despite its compact size. The Peikunter brain size debate for Homo floresiensis goes far beyond just counting cubic centimeters. It forces us to confront our anthropocentric biases and reevaluate what we define as intelligence and the necessary physical hardware for it. It suggests that complex behaviors, perhaps even rudimentary language or advanced social structures, might not require the massive brains we associate with Homo sapiens. This tiny hominin, with its surprisingly small cranium, stands as a profound challenge to our understanding of human cognitive evolution, proving once again that the path of life is rarely as straightforward as we might initially assume. Having wrestled with the perplexing question of the hobbit's diminutive brain, let's now turn our attention to something equally astonishing, their tool technology. You see, if you subscribe to the idea that a smaller brain inherently means lower intelligence, then the archaeological record at Liangbua presents a significant conundrum. Scattered among the bones of Homo floresiensis and the dwarf stegodon were thousands of stone artifacts, a clear indication that these small-brained hominins were not just passively existing, but actively shaping their environment. It's like finding a highly advanced smartphone in the pocket of someone who you thought could barely operate a flip phone. These weren't just crude, unmodified stones. The tools, found primarily made from chert and volcanic rock, include a range of sophisticated implements. You've got flakes blades, points, and perforators, all meticulously crafted with a technique known as the Levallois method, or at least a highly refined form of flake production. The Levallois technique, which involved carefully preparing a coarse stone to produce flakes of a predetermined size and shape, is generally associated with much larger-brained hominins like archaic Homo sapiens and Neanderthals dating back to the Middle Paleolithic. It requires foresight, planning, and a deep understanding of percussion mechanics. For the hobbits, with their chimp-sized brains, to be using such advanced methods was, to put it mildly, mind-boggling. Imagine a hominin barely a meter tall holding a stone hammer and striking a core with precision, visualizing the shape of the flake it wants to detach. This isn't random banging, it's intentional, skilled craftsmanship. These tools would have been essential for their survival, for butchering the dwarf stegodon, for processing plant materials, perhaps for shaping wood, or even for preparing hides. The sheer volume and consistency of these tools across different stratigraphic layers at Liangbua suggests that tool-making was a habitual, ingrained behavior passed down through generations. It wasn't a one-off improvisation. It was a fundamental part of their culture and subsistence strategy, a legitimate historical event that helped further solidify the archaeological importance of Liangbua. Was the discovery of these varied and advanced stone tools in close association with the Homo floresiensis. Remains, pushing back the perceived cognitive abilities required for such craftsmanship. Historians still debate whether Washington, the H. floresiensis population, invented these technologies independently on Flores, or if their ancestral population brought these skills with them from the mainland and then maintained or even refined them in isolation. Regardless of origin, their continued use and effectiveness over hundreds of thousands of years speaks volumes about the hobbits' cognitive abilities. It suggests a level of intelligence that isn't solely dictated by brain volume. Perhaps it's about neural efficiency, specialized brain regions, or simply a different way of thinking that we, with our large, complex brains, are only beginning to comprehend. One quirky or off-color fact is that some researchers have playfully suggested that the hobbits, needing to compensate for their small stature, became exceptionally clever with their hands, almost like ancient MacGyvers, making the most out of whatever materials they had available. You can almost picture a tiny hobbit carefully selecting the perfect stone, squinting with concentration, before deftly striking it to produce a sharp blade. These tools are the tangible proof that despite their size, the hobbits were not simple, unintelligent creatures. They were resourceful, capable, and highly adapted to their unique island world. The sophisticated hard tool technology of Homo floresiensis serves as a powerful counter-argument to the initial dismissal of their intellectual capabilities based solely on their cranial capacity. It forces us to reconsider the very nature of intelligence and how it manifests across the diverse landscape of hominin evolution. So we've marveled at the sophisticated tools crafted by these diminutive hominins, challenging our preconceptions about their intelligence. Now let's ignite another fascinating aspect of their lives on Flores: the evidence for fire use. Imagine the flickering glow against the dark walls of Liangbua Cave, the crackle of burning wood, and the warmth on a cool night. The controlled use of fire is considered a significant milestone in human evolution, providing protection from predators, warmth light, and crucially the ability to cook food, which expands dietary options and makes nutrients more accessible. For Homo floresiensis, managing fire would have been an immense advantage. Archaeological excavations at Liangbua have indeed yielded tantalizing evidence suggesting that the hobbits were at the very least associated with fire. Researchers have found charcoal deposits, burnt bone fragments, and heat-affected sediments within the same stratigraphic layers as Homo floresiensis. Remains in their stone tools. This isn't just accidental campfire residue from later inhabitants. The consistent presence of these fire-related materials throughout the layers inhabited by the hobbits strongly suggests a long-term deliberate interaction with fire. It's like finding a barbecue pit in your backyard and realizing your ancestors were master grillers. Now, it's important to distinguish between simply being associated with fire, perhaps opportunistically scavenging from natural wildfires, and actively controlling and using it. While definitive hearth structures, like those found in Neanderthal or Homo erectus, sites are less obvious at Liangbua, the widespread and sustained presence of burnt materials points strongly towards deliberate management. This could involve maintaining natural fires, transporting embers, or even igniting new fires. Either way, it requires a level of cognitive complexity planning and social cooperation. You don't just stumble upon fire management, it's a skill that has to be learned and passed down. Historians still debate whether the hobbits independently developed fire control on Flores, or if the knowledge was brought by their ancestral population during their initial migration. The implications of our fire use for the hobbits' daily lives are profound. Picture them using fire to ward off any lingering, slightly smaller Komodo dragons at night, making their sleeping areas safer. Imagine them huddled around a flame for warmth during the cooler periods or venturing deeper into the cave system with a flaming torch extending their exploration and resource gathering. And then there's the cooking. Roasting meat like the dwarf stegodon would have made it easier to chew and digest, extracting more calories and nutrients from their diet. This would be particularly beneficial in an environment with limited resources, making their food supply go further. It's a legitimate historical event in hominin development, a game changer that propelled early humans forward. A quirky or off-color fact is that some researchers have even playfully speculated that controlling fire might have allowed the hobbits to develop a sense of home within the cave, a central gathering point that fostered social bonding and the sharing of knowledge. You can almost envision them gathered around a fire, perhaps sharing stories or planning the next day's hunt, much like humans have done for millennia. This control over a powerful natural force speaks volumes about their adaptive intelligence, further chipping away at the notion that their small brains meant limited capabilities. The evidence for fire use by Homo floresiensis adds another layer of complexity to our understanding of their lives. It paints a picture of a resourceful, intelligent hominin capable of manipulating their environment to their advantage. It suggests a level of sophistication that goes well beyond what one might expect from a creature of their stature and cranial capacity, reinforcing the idea that the hobbits were far from primitive. With evidence of sophisticated tool-making and potentially even fire use, the hobbits are clearly emerging as far more capable than their size might initially suggest. This leads us to another critical aspect of their survival on Flores, their hunting strategies. How did a group of hominins barely a meter tall manage to successfully hunt animals significantly larger than themselves, like the dwarf stegodon? This wasn't a casual stroll to the nearest berry bush. This was serious coordinated subsistence. You can imagine the conversation, "Okay guys, who's up for tackling something the size of a cow today?" The most compelling evidence for their hunting prowess comes from the numerous bones of stegodon, Floresiensis insularis, found alongside Homo floresiensis, remains and tools within Liangbua. Many of these stegodon bones bear distinct cut marks consistent with butchery using the stone tools we discussed. This isn't just scavenging. While scavenging was certainly a part of the hominin diet throughout history, the consistent pattern of cut marks in specific areas indicative of disarticulation and defleshing points to deliberate processing of carcasses, likely from animals they themselves had brought down. It's the difference between finding a discarded pizza box and ordering and consuming the whole pizza yourself. Hunting a dwarf. Stegodon. Even a small one would have been no trivial task for the hobbits. These animals, while small for elephants, still possessed considerable bulk, thick hides and tusks. It would have required planning cooperation and potentially the use of environmental features. Imagine a coordinated group of hobbits driving a stegodon towards a natural trap, perhaps a steep ravine or boggy ground, where the animal would become mired and vulnerable. Or perhaps they use their advanced stone tools as thrusting spears targeting vulnerable points on the animal's body. The combination of intelligence, social cohesion, and effective weaponry would have been crucial. A legitimate historical event in human evolution that highlights similar ingenuity is the mammoth steppe hunting of large megafauna by Neanderthals and early modern humans. Using cooperative strategies and specialized tools demonstrating that large prey, hunting was a hallmark of successful hominin adaptation. Historians still debate whether the hobbits primarily focused on hunting juvenile stegodon, easier to overpower, or if they were capable of bringing down adult individuals. The fossil record indicates both, suggesting a flexible approach. A quirky or off-color fact to consider is that some researchers have even speculated that the hobbits might have learned to exploit the aggressive behavior of the Komodo dragons. They could have potentially wounded a stegodon, allowed a Komodo to track and finish it, and then driven the dragon away to claim the carcass. It's a risky strategy, but hey, desperate times call for creative measures, and who wouldn't want a dragon to do some of the dirty work for you? Beyond stegodon, the hobbits likely hunted other smaller animals on the island, such as giant rats and various birds, supplementing their diet with gathered plant foods. Their ability to consistently acquire protein from a variety of sources would have been essential for their survival in an environment with limited resources. Their small size might have even been an advantage in navigating dense jungle terrain, allowing them to move more stealthily and access areas inaccessible to larger predators or competing hominins. The evidence for sophisticated hunting strategies by Homo floresiensis further reinforces the picture of a highly adaptable and intelligent hominin. It contradicts the simplistic view that their small brains equated to primitive behavior. Instead, it paints a picture of cunning hunters, skilled tool users, and cooperative social beings who mastered their unique island environment for hundreds of thousands of years. It's a remarkable testament to the resourcefulness of our extended family tree. You've now got a good grasp of the hobbits' capabilities, their clever tools, their probable use of fire, and their impressive hunting skills. But where did we unearth these incredible insights? The answer lies in the very heart of our story, the Yuri Liangbua cave site. Imagine a massive limestone cavern, cool and damp, stretching deep into the earth, its entrance nestled in a steep forested valley on the western part of Flores. For paleontologists and archaeologists, Liangbua is not just a cave, it's a time capsule, a perfectly preserved archive of hundreds of thousands of years of life, death, and adaptation. Liangbua means cold cave in the local Mangrai language, a fitting name for a place that offers a welcome respite from the tropical heat. Its sheer size is impressive, with a main chamber that could comfortably house a small village. But it's not the size that makes it extraordinary, it's the stratigraphy. You see over millennia layers of sediment, fine silts, volcanic ash, and fallen rock have accumulated on the cave floor, burying and protecting whatever lay beneath. Each layer represents a different slice of time, like the pages of an ancient book, each one preserving the footprints of past inhabitants. This natural layering, undisturbed for vast periods, is what makes Liangbua an unparalleled site for their preservation. The cave's constant temperature and humidity, coupled with the fine-grained sediments, created ideal conditions for preserving delicate organic materials and, crucially, hominin bones. Unlike open-air sites where bones are quickly weathered and scattered, Liangbua acted like a natural refrigerator and tomb, gently encapsulating the remains of Homo floresiensis, the dwarf, stegodon, the giant rats, and their stone tools. When archaeologists began excavating, it was like peeling back layers of an onion, each revealing a new astonishing glimpse into this ancient world. A legitimate historical event, truly pivotal to our understanding, was the first systematic archaeological excavation of Liang Bua in 2001 by a joint Indonesian-Australian team, which set the stage for the dramatic Homo floresiensis discovery 2 years later. The significance of Liang Bua goes beyond just the individual finds. It's the context that truly matters. Finding a skull is one thing. Finding a skull consistently associated with specific types of tools, specific animal remains, and within specific geological layers tells a much richer story. It allows scientists to reconstruct the environment, diet, and behavior of Homo floresiensis with a level of detail rarely afforded in the study of early hominins. This continuity of occupation spanning from potentially 190,000 Boston to around 50,000 years ago paints a picture of a species that was incredibly resilient and successful on the island for a vast period. You'd think after all that time they might have invented some cave cleaning tools, but alas, no ancient brooms have been unearthed. Historians still debate whether other undiscovered cave sites on Flores might hold even older Homo floresiensis remains or different insights into their technology and behavior. For now, however, Liang Bua remains the primary window into their world. A quirky or off-color fact is that local folklore in Flores has long spoken of a small ape-like creature called the Ebu Gogo, which roughly translates to grandmother who eats everything. While there's no direct scientific link, it's fascinating to consider if these ancient legends might be distant, distorted echoes of encounters with Homo floresiensis. Perhaps some modern humans even stumbled upon the Hobbits' abandoned cave homes. So when you envision Homo floresiensis, picture them not just as a collection of bones, but as living beings moving through the profound silence of Liang Bua, their shadows dancing on the cave walls in the light of a fire. The Liang Bua cave site is more than just a dig. It's the stage upon which the incredible drama of the Hobbit's existence unfolded, a testament to the power of natural preservation and the dedication of those who painstakingly brought their story to light. You've seen the treasures hidden within Liang Bua, that magnificent time capsule, but even the most perfectly preserved sites come with their own set of challenges. For Homo floresiensis, one of the most enduring and frustrating hurdles for scientists has been the dating difficulties. Pinpointing exactly when these little hominins lived when they first arrived and when they finally vanished has been a complex and often contentious puzzle. It's like trying to put together a jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces are missing and the other half are covered in mud. Initially, the dates for Homo floresiensis were astonishingly recent. Skeletal remains were thought to be as young as 18,000 years old, with tools even younger. This pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible for a hominin species other than Homo sapiens to survive so late in human history. It suggested a remarkable prolonged coexistence between the hobbits and modern humans, who are known to have reached Australia by at least 65,000 years ago and likely passed through Flores on their way. Imagine our ancestors possibly rubbing shoulders with these tiny beings. However, more rigorous and sophisticated dating techniques employed after the initial sensational discoveries significantly revised these ages. The original dating had suffered from issues related to contextual contamination and complexities in the sediment layers. Researchers employed a battery of methods including optically stimulated luminescence, OSL uranium series dating, and argon-argon dating on volcanic tephra layers. These methods, while highly precise, are also incredibly sensitive to environmental factors and the specific materials being dated. It's like trying to measure something with a laser ruler, but the target keeps wiggling. The revised dates published in 2016 painted a different, though no less fascinating picture. The Homo floresiensis skeletal remains were found to range from approximately 100,000 to 60,000 years old, with associated stone tools dating from around 190,000 to 50,000 years ago. This still places them firmly within the late Pleistocene, coexisting with, or at least overlapping with, the early arrival of Homo sapiens in Southeast Asia. This revision was a legitimate historical event in the Homo floresiensis saga as it adjusted much of the scientific narrative around their interactions with modern humans. These dating difficulties highlight the immense challenges inherent in paleontology and archaeology. You're not just digging up bones, You're deciphering a geological clock, each layer a tick of time. Volcanic activity on Flores, while contributing to the preservation of the site with layers of ash, also created complexities, as older ash layers might overlay younger ones in disturbed contexts, or erosion could remove key markers. Historians still debate whether even the current refined dates fully capture the entire chronological range of Homo floresiensis. Existence as conditions suitable for preservation might not have occurred uniformly across all periods of their occupation. A quirky or off-color fact to keep in mind is that the initial much younger dates for the Hobbits fueled some rather wild speculation, including theories that Homo floresiensis might still survive in remote parts of Flores, giving rise to local legends. While highly unlikely and unsupported by scientific evidence, it just goes to show how captivating the idea of a living hobbit can be. You can almost imagine paleontologists trekking through the dense jungle, half hoping to bump into one. Despite the challenges, the revised dates for Homo floresiensis have provided a much clearer picture of their long tenure on the island. They represent a hominin species that thrived for an incredibly long time, adapting to profound environmental shifts before eventually disappearing. The precise reasons for their extinction, whether it was the changing climate, volcanic activity, or perhaps interactions with our own species, remain an active area of research. But the chronological framework provided by overcoming those initial dating difficulties is crucial for piecing together their final chapter. Now that we've navigated the intricacies of dating the Hobbits and understood the compelling evidence for their unique adaptation to Flores, it's time to delve into the most significant challenge to the idea of Homo floresiensis as a distinct species, the more alternative theories. You see, when such a groundbreaking discovery clashes so dramatically with established paradigms, skepticism is a natural, indeed, a healthy part of the scientific process. It forces proponents to sharpen their arguments and re-examine every piece of evidence. The primary alternative theory championed by some prominent researchers was that the Homo floresiensis skeleton, specifically the most complete individual LB1, was not a new species, but rather a diseased or developmentally abnormal individual of Homo sapiens. This argument suggested that LB1 was simply a modern human suffering from a pathological condition that accounted for its small stature and, critically, its small brain. It was in essence an attempt to bring the Hobbit back into the familiar fold of our own species, rather than accepting a radical new branch on the human family tree. It was like saying that your incredibly rare, valuable antique coin was just a deformed penny. This theory gained significant traction initially because it offered a less disruptive explanation. If LB1 was just a pathological Homo sapiens, then the neat evolutionary progression of ever larger brains and increasing complexity remained largely intact. The two most frequently cited conditions were microcephaly, a neurodevelopmental disorder resulting in an abnormally small head and brain, and various forms of dwarfism. Proponents of this view argued that the skeletal features, while unusual, could be explained by these conditions rather than by unique evolutionary adaptations. The core of this debate hinged on detailed anatomical comparisons. Was the unique morphology of Homo floresiensis a result of genetic programming for a distinct species shaped by millions of years of evolution? Or was it the outcome of developmental abnormalities within an individual, Homo sapiens? This wasn't just an academic squabble. It touched upon fundamental questions of what defines a species and how we interpret fossil evidence. A legitimate historical event that fueled this controversy was the initial anatomical analysis by some researchers who concluded that LB1 exhibited features consistent with certain pathological conditions, directly challenging the new species interpretation. Historians still debate whether the initial scientific arguments for pathology were given undue weight due to the perceived unlikeliness of a small-brain hominin surviving so recently. It's easy to dismiss what doesn't fit your preconceived notions. A quirky or off-color fact is that the debate became so heated at one point, it was almost like a real-life scientific wrestling match with researchers throwing metaphorical chairs at each other during conferences. You half expected someone to yell, "Is that all you got?" However, as more skeletal material was unearthed from Liangbua, including other partial skeletons and isolated bones, all exhibiting the same unique diminutive features as LB1. The pathological argument began to weaken. The sheer consistency of the traits across multiple individuals became increasingly difficult to explain as mere random pathologies. It shifted from one sick individual to an entire population of sick individuals, which stretches credulity. Moreover, detailed studies of LB1's skull and limb bones revealed a unique suite of characteristics that did not perfectly match any known human pathological condition, but instead aligned more closely with very ancient hominin forms like Homo erectus, from which the Hobbits are thought to have descended. So while the alternative theories initially provided a compelling counter-narrative, particularly in the face of such a radical discovery, the accumulating evidence has largely shifted the scientific consensus back towards Homo floresiensis, being a genuinely distinct species. It's a testament to the self-correcting nature of science. Strong initial challenges are vital, but ultimately the weight of the evidence usually prevails. Building on the discussion of alternative theories, let's zoom in on the most prominent and frequently debated pathological explanation for the Hobbit's small brain, the microcephaly hypothesis. This theory posited that the individual, Homo floresiensis, skeleton LB1 was actually a modern human, Homo sapiens, who suffered from microcephaly, a neurological disorder characterized by an abnormally small head and brain. This condition often results in intellectual disability and other developmental challenges. If true, it would mean that the small brain was a disease symptom, not an evolutionary adaptation, thereby negating the idea of a distinct small brain hominin species. The argument for microcephaly was compelling to some because it offered a seemingly neat explanation for LB1's remarkably small cranial capacity, around 400 cc. Remember, human microcephalics can indeed have brains in this size range. Furthermore, some of the facial features observed in LB1, such as a receding forehead and prominent brow ridges, were superficially similar to traits seen in certain microcephalic individuals. It was like looking at a slightly distorted reflection and assuming it was just a bad mirror, not a different person entirely. However, a closer, more detailed examination of LB1's skull and postcranial skeleton by multiple research teams began to unravel the microcephaly hypothesis. While the brain size was indeed small, the shape and structure of the brain, as inferred from endocasts, molds of the brain cavity, did not match typical patterns seen in microcephalic humans. Instead, the Hobbit's brain endocast showed unique features and proportions that were more consistent with a highly encephalized, meaning relatively complex for its size brain, but one derived from a more ancient hominin lineage, such as Homo erectus. Microcephalic brains, by contrast, tend to have a simplified surface anatomy and a different overall morphology. A legitimate historical event that strongly countered the microcephaly argument was there a detailed comparative study of the LB1 endocast, which revealed structural complexities not typically found in microcephalic modern humans, leading many researchers to dismiss the hypothesis as unlikely. Furthermore, the postcranial skeleton of LB1 also presented challenges to the microcephaly theory. Microcephalic individuals, while having small heads, typically have relatively normal-sized bodies for Homo sapiens. LB1, however, had proportions that were distinctly different from modern humans, including unusually long feet relative to their leg length and a pelvis and shoulder morphology that suggested more primitive locomotion and climbing abilities. These features were not consistent with any known human pathological condition. Rather, they pointed towards an ancient ancestry and unique evolutionary trajectory. It's like finding someone with a tiny head, but also flippers for feet and feathers, and still trying to claim they're just a sick human. Historians still debate whether the initial prominence of the microcephaly hypothesis stemmed from a genuine scientific uncertainty or from a subconscious reluctance within the paleoanthropological community to accept a challenge to the established narrative of human brain evolution. It's a complex interplay of data interpretation and disciplinary conservatism. A quirky or off-color fact is that some proponents of the microcephaly theory even suggested that LB1 might have suffered from Laron's syndrome, a form of dwarfism, further complicating the debate, with multiple proposed pathologies, almost as if throwing every possible illness at the skeleton to see what stuck. Ultimately, while the microcephaly hypothesis served as an important scientific challenge forcing rigorous re-examination of the evidence, the overwhelming consensus among researchers today is that the unique anatomical features of Homo floresiensis, both cranial and postcranial, are best explained by insular dwarfism acting on an ancient hominin lineage, rather than a pathological condition in a modern human. The consistency of these features across multiple individuals, as we discussed, further solidified this conclusion, moving Homo floresiensis from a potential medical anomaly to a truly unique and fascinating species in our family tree. Following on from the microcephaly hypothesis, another specific pathological explanation proposed for Homo floresiensis's diminutive stature and unusual features was Laron syndrome. This theory, like the microcephaly one, sought to explain the Hobbits' unique morphology as a result of a genetic disorder affecting a Homo sapiens individual rather than an entirely new hominin species. It's important to understand these counterarguments because they show the intense scrutiny any groundbreaking discovery faces. Laron syndrome is a rare genetic disorder characterized by insensitivity to growth hormone, leading to severe short stature. A relatively small head, though not as dramatically small as in microcephaly, distinct facial features, like a prominent forehead and small jaw, and other physiological characteristics. Proponents of this hypothesis argued that several features observed in LB1, the most complete Homo floresiensis, skeleton could be consistent with Laron syndrome. For instance, the short stature, the somewhat small cranial capacity, though higher than typical microcephaly, and certain limb proportions were cited as potential matches. It was an attempt to fit the square peg of Homo floresiensis into the round hole of a known human pathology. However, just like with the microcephaly hypothesis, detailed anatomical analysis began to reveal inconsistencies. While some superficial similarities might exist, a closer look at the specific bone structures and proportions of LB1 revealed a suite of features that did not align perfectly with Laron syndrome. For example, individuals with Laron syndrome typically have a specific bone density and bone maturation pattern, which were not observed in the Hobbit remains. Furthermore, the overall skeletal morphology of LB1, particularly the primitive wrist bones and foot structure, bore a stronger resemblance to much older, more ancestral hominins, rather than a modern human suffering from a developmental disorder. It's like trying to claim a vintage car is just a new model with a broken engine, even though its entire chassis is clearly from a bygone era. A legitimate historical event in the scientific debate was the publication of detailed anatomical comparisons of LB1's skeletal features with those of modern human populations affected by various pathological conditions, including Laron syndrome. These studies systematically highlighted the anatomical discrepancies that argued against a pathological Homo sapiens explanation. These analyses, often involving high-resolution imaging and morphometric measurements, provided the empirical data needed to counter the disease hypotheses. Historians still debate whether the prolonged adherence to the Laron syndrome or microcephaly hypotheses by a vocal minority of researchers was more about scientific caution or a fundamental disagreement on the interpretation of ancestral versus pathological traits. It shows how difficult it can be to shift established scientific views, even in the face of new evidence. A quirky or off-color fact is that some paleoanthropologists, frustrated by the ongoing pathological arguments, humorously suggested that if Homo floresiensis was indeed a diseased Homo sapiens, it must have been a very specific and previously unknown disease that selectively affected only hominins on Flores and conferred upon them an entirely new suite of ancient non-human-like skeletal traits. Ultimately, while the Laron syndrome hypothesis, along with microcephaly, provided important intellectual challenges to the new species interpretation, the cumulative weight of the anatomical and archaeological evidence has largely moved the scientific consensus away from these pathological explanations. The recurring and consistent suite of primitive and unique features across multiple Homo floresiensis individuals, coupled with the clear ecological context of island dwarfism, overwhelmingly points to Homo floresiensis as a genuinely distinct ancient hominin species that successfully adapted to its isolated environment. The Hobbits were not sick humans. They were survivors of a truly unique evolutionary journey. You've just heard about the specific pathological conditions like microcephaly and Laron syndrome proposed to explain the Hobbits. Now let's consolidate and explore the powerful counter-arguments to pathology that ultimately led the vast majority of the scientific community to accept Homo floresiensis as a distinct species. This wasn't a sudden surrender. It was a methodical dismantling of the disease hypotheses piece by piece through rigorous anatomical and archaeological evidence. It was like watching a master detective meticulously build a case, slowly revealing the truth. The first and perhaps most crucial counter-argument was the inconsistency across multiple individuals. When LB1 was initially discovered, the diseased Homo sapiens theory seemed plausible, if highly speculative. But as more skeletal material emerged from Liangbua, including additional jaw fragments, teeth, and postcranial bones from other individuals, they all displayed the same unique suite of primitive and diminutive features. If Homo floresiensis was merely a pathological Homo sapiens, it would require an entire population to suffer from the exact same, incredibly rare genetic disorder, manifesting in the exact same way over tens of thousands of years. The statistical probability of this occurring is astronomically low. It's like finding a whole village where everyone has 6 fingers and claiming it's just a widespread accident, not a genetic trait. Secondly, the anatomical features were too unique and too primitive to be explained by known human pathologies. Remember the wrist bones of LB1. They were strikingly similar to those of apes and early hominins, like Australopithecus. Not modern humans or even diseased modern humans. The shape of the foot, the proportions of the limbs, the pelvic structure, all showed a mosaic of traits, some unique to Homo floresiensis, and others remarkably archaic, hinting at a deep evolutionary past perhaps from a Homo erectus ancestor, rather than a degenerate Homo sapiens. Pathologies often result in disorganization or simplification of features, not the emergence of a complex, well-integrated set of ancient traits. A legitimate historical event that significantly weakened the pathology arguments was the publication of detailed morphological analyses of Homo floresiensis, his wrist, ankle, and shoulder bones, which consistently showed primitive features inconsistent with Homo sapiens pathology. Thirdly, the brain shape was wrong for pathology. While microcephalics have small brains, the internal cast of LB1's brain case revealed a distinct organizational pattern with relatively developed frontal lobes and temporal regions and complex convolutions. This structure, though small, was more akin to that of Homo erectus than to the simplified, often malformed brains seen in microcephaly. It suggested a brain that was small but functionally efficient and organized, rather than one damaged by disease. Historians still debate whether the initial interpretation of brain pathology was a genuine misreading of the evidence or a reflection of anthropocentric bias, where larger brains were seen as the sole pathway to complex behavior. Finally, the archaeological context provided powerful counter-evidence. The sophisticated stone tools, the evidence of hunting, dwarfed stegodon, and the consistent use of fire over a long period were inconsistent with the severely impaired cognitive abilities typically associated with the proposed pathological conditions. You don't get finely crafted tools and cooperative hunting from a population suffering from widespread severe intellectual disability. A quirky or off-color fact is that some frustrated proponents of the Homo floresiensis species jokingly referred to the pathology theorists as suggesting the hobbits were too sick to be smart, but somehow still smart enough to build a thriving culture and hunt elephants. In essence, the counter-arguments to pathology relied on the sheer weight and consistency of the anatomical, archaeological, and chronological evidence. Homo floresiensis simply didn't fit the mold of a diseased Homo sapiens. Instead, they presented as a beautifully adapted, uniquely evolved hominin species, a testament to the incredible plasticity of human evolution. The acceptance of Homo floresiensis as a distinct species wasn't just a scientific conclusion. It was a profound shift in our understanding of the breadth of our own family tree. We've systematically dismantled the pathological arguments firmly establishing Homo floresiensis as a distinct and fascinating species. Now, you might be thinking, if they're so unique, can't we just get some genetic studies narrowed on? Surely ancient DNA could definitively tell us where they fit on the family tree, right? This is where the story hits a frustrating but understandable roadblock. The short answer is probably not, at least not yet. The dream of extracting viable ancient DNA from Homo floresiensis remains tantalizingly out of reach. For DNA to survive for tens of thousands, let alone hundreds of thousands of years, the conditions have to be exceptionally specific and consistently cold. Think of the permafrost of Siberia, where magnificent woolly mammoth DNA has been recovered, or the caves in Europe that preserved Neanderthal genetic material. These environments are characterized by stable low temperatures that inhibit the degradation of DNA molecules. Flores, unfortunately, is a tropical island. Liangbiwa Cave, while offering excellent preservation for bones, is warm and humid. These are precisely the conditions that accelerate DNA decay. Heat and moisture act like tiny molecular shredders, breaking down the fragile double helix into unreadable fragments over relatively short periods. While exceptional circumstances can sometimes defy expectations, the general rule is that ancient DNA recovery from tropical environments beyond a few thousand years is incredibly challenging, if not impossible, with current technology. It's like trying to find a perfectly preserved snowball in the middle of a desert summer. Not going to happen. This lack of ancient DNA has meant that scientists have had to rely entirely on morphological shape and structure comparisons of the bones and teeth, along with the archaeological context to infer Homo floresiensis' evolutionary relationships. This is why the debate over their classification was so intense and prolonged. Without a genetic blueprint, their placement on the hominin family tree remains a matter of inference, albeit highly educated inference, based on meticulous anatomical detail. Historians still debate whether the absence of recoverable ancient DNA from tropical hominin sites is solely due to environmental degradation or also due to inherent differences in the preservation potential of various hominin lineages. Despite the current limitations, the scientific community continues to hold out hope. Advances in ancient DNA extraction and sequencing techniques are occurring at an astonishing pace. New methods allow for the recovery of even highly degraded and fragmented DNA. Perhaps one day a breakthrough will allow for the recovery of even small snippets of Homo floresiensis. DNA enough to confirm their genetic distinctiveness and clarify their exact relationship to other hominin species. This would be a legitimate historical event in paleoanthropology, a game-changer of epic proportions. You'd imagine the champagne corks popping in labs worldwide. A quirky or off-color fact is that some researchers, perhaps with a touch of dark humor, have even half-jokingly suggested that if we ever do find viable Homo floresiensis DNA, the ethical implications of cloning or de-extinction would make the Jurassic Park movie look like a pleasant Sunday picnic. But for now, that remains firmly in the realm of science fiction. The reality is far more grounded. The ongoing absence of ancient DNA means that the story of the Hobbits must continue to be pieced together from bones, tools, and the geological record. So while the promise of genetic studies for Homo floresiensis tantalizes for now, you must continue to rely on the painstaking work of anatomical comparison and archaeological context to understand this remarkable species. Their secret genetic code remains locked away for now, a profound mystery of the tropical past. Since the promise of ancient DNA remains a distant dream for Homo floresiensis, we must continue our detective work by looking at the available anatomical evidence to trace their likely origins. This brings us to their probable African ancestry, specifically their connection to Homo erectus. While they are geographically far removed on a tiny Indonesian island, the Hobbits' story almost certainly begins much, much further west in the cradle of humanity. Think back to the primitive features we discussed that countered the pathology hypotheses, the unique wrist bones, the distinctive foot structure, and certain aspects of their skull. These are not traits you typically find in modern humans. Instead, they share remarkable similarities with earlier hominin species, most notably Homo erectus. Homo erectus was an incredibly successful and widespread hominin, known for being the first of our ancestors to consistently leave Africa, beginning roughly 1.8 million years ago. They were taller than the Hobbits with larger brains and were the first to master controlled fire and produce sophisticated Acheulean hand axes. The prevailing scientific hypothesis is that Homo floresiensis represents a population of Homo erectus, or a very closely related early Homo species that somehow made its way to Flores. Once isolated on the island, natural selection driven by the limited resources and absence of large predators we've discussed gradually drove them down the path of insular dwarfism. Their bodies shrank and remarkably their brains also reduced in size, but critically they retained a behavioral sophistication tool-making fire use hunting that belies their small cranial capacity. It's like a distant relative who moved to a tiny house, and over generations everyone in the family just naturally became smaller to fit comfortably. This theory makes sense for several reasons. Firstly, Homo erectus is known to have colonized much of Asia with fossil evidence found in places like Java, China, and even as far as Dmanisi in Georgia. Flores lies within the general geographical range of Homo erectus dispersal. Secondly, the anatomical similarities, particularly in features that are less likely to be affected by pathology, strongly suggest a shared ancestry. It's a legitimate historical event that Homo erectus was the first hominin to leave Africa in significant numbers, setting the stage for later more diverse dispersals. Historians still debate whether the ancestral Homo erectus population that reached Flores was a direct descendant of the Javanese Homo erectus, Peking man or Java man, or if they came from a distinct earlier wave of dispersal from mainland Asia, or even directly from Africa via a more southerly route. Regardless of the exact staging post, the ultimate origin points back to Africa. A quirky or off-color fact to chew on is that if you trace back far enough, you realize that every human on the planet, including you, has an ultimate African ancestry. So in a way, the Hobbits are just very, very distant cousins who took a wildly different shrinking detour. The journey from Africa to Flores would have been monumental, requiring incredible resilience and adaptation. It certainly wasn't a planned expedition with maps and packed lunches. More likely it involved accidental raftings across water barriers, perhaps on natural rafts of vegetation carried by currents after storms. This implies not just robust survival skills, but also a degree of luck. So while their modern appearance is utterly unique, the deep evolutionary roots of Homo floresiensis point firmly to an African ancestry, with Homo erectus as their most probable direct ancestor. This connection highlights the remarkable migratory capabilities of early hominins and the extraordinary ways in which isolated environments can sculpt new forms from ancient lineages. We've traced the Hobbits' likely lineage back to African Homo erectus, a species renowned for its widespread travels. But how did these early hominins, presumably the ancestors of Homo floresiensis, manage to get to Flores, an island separated from the Asian mainland by significant stretches of open ocean? This brings us to the fascinating and often speculative realm of migration routes, and the incredible sea journeys undertaken by early hominins. This wasn't a leisurely cruise. It was an arduous, probably accidental, and utterly terrifying voyage. Flores has almost certainly never been connected to the Asian mainland by land bridges, even during periods of dramatically lower sea levels during glacial maxima. The deep-water Lombok Strait to Flores' west has acted as a persistent biogeographical barrier for millions of years, famously separating Asian fauna from Australian fauna, the Wallace Line. This means that any hominin population reaching Flores would have had to cross significant stretches of water. You're not talking about wading across a shallow river, you're talking about open ocean. The most widely accepted theory for how early hominins cross such water barriers is by accidental rafting. Picture this: a massive storm, perhaps a tsunami-like event, rips through a coastal area, dislodging large rafts of vegetation, fallen trees, or even land masses carrying along any unfortunate creatures or hominins caught on them. These natural rafts, propelled by ocean currents, could then drift for days or weeks. For such a journey to be successful, a small viable population, perhaps a family group, would need to survive the ordeal with enough food and water and then successfully land on a habitable island. The odds seem astronomical, right? Yet it happened not just for Homo floresiensis ancestors, but also for the dwarf stegodon and other animals. There's evidence of human presence in Wallacea, the island chain, including Flores, dating back well over 1 million years. Stone tools found at Mata Menge on Flores dating to around 700,000 years ago suggest an even earlier hominin presence than the hobbits themselves, possibly even their direct ancestors. This means these incredible sea crossings weren't a one-off fluke, but occurred repeatedly over deep time. A legitimate historical event that revolutionized our understanding of early hominin seafaring capabilities was the discovery of the Mojokerto child skull in Java in 1936, which once accurately dated demonstrated Homo erectus presence in Southeast Asia by at least 1.8 million years ago, establishing a launching point for further island colonization. Historians still debate whether these early sea crossings were entirely accidental or if they involved some rudimentary form of purposeful seafaring, perhaps simple rafts or logs guided by paddles. While sophisticated boat building is usually attributed to much later Homo sapiens, the sheer number of successful colonizations of islands by Homo erectus and other early hominins suggests a remarkable, if perhaps unconscious, aptitude for water crossings. A quirky or off-color fact is that some adventurous researchers have even attempted to replicate these ancient journeys using primitive rafts made of bamboo, demonstrating the theoretical possibility, albeit under controlled conditions, and with plenty of modern provisions. You could call it the ultimate prehistoric gap year challenge. So when you consider the hobbits, remember that their ancestors undertook one of the most perilous journeys in early human history. They didn't just walk to Flores, they sailed perhaps unknowingly on makeshift vessels across formidable stretches of ocean. These minor migration routes, driven by geological forces and incredible resilience, represent a triumph of survival against overwhelming odds, setting the stage for the unique evolutionary story that unfolded on their isolated island home. It's a reminder of the extraordinary lengths our ancestors went to, pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible. Having marveled at the incredible journey their ancestors undertook to reach Flores, let's consider what happened once they arrived and settled into their isolated island home. The crucial process of Wanyur, the cultural transmission. You see, survival on an island for hundreds of thousands of years isn't just about genetic adaptation. It's equally about passing down vital knowledge, skills, and practices from one generation to the next. This isn't just about genes. It's about memes in the original biological sense, units of cultural information. Imagine a group of early hominins arriving on Flores. They would have carried with them a baseline of knowledge how to make basic stone tools, perhaps some understanding of plant foods and rudimentary social structures. But the island was a new environment presenting unique challenges and opportunities. They would have needed to learn which local plants were edible or medicinal, how to hunt the dwarf stegodon, how to find fresh water, and how to navigate the volcanic landscape. This accumulated local ecological knowledge, coupled with their existing technological skills, had to be effectively transmitted to their offspring. Without this efficient transfer of information, the population would quickly perish. It's like being dropped into a new country with a totally different language and no translation app. You'd be lost without someone to teach you the ropes. The long-term presence of Homo floresiensis at Liangbua, spanning roughly 190,000 to 50,000 years ago, and the consistent nature of their tool technology over this immense period strongly suggests highly effective cultural transmission. The stone tools, while demonstrating sophistication, didn't drastically change or evolve into entirely new forms over time in the way that Homo sapiens toolkits often did. This conservative technology might suggest a very stable, efficient transmission of learned behaviors, where tried and true methods were prioritized and perfected rather than radical innovation. It indicates a culture that was highly adapted to its niche, a perfect fit for its environment. A legitimate historical event illustrating the importance of cultural transmission in early human history is the long-term persistence of a Chilean hand axe technology across vast geographical areas and for over 1 million years, demonstrating how stable and successful complex technological traditions could be. This transmission would have occurred through direct teaching, observation, and imitation within social groups. Picture the elders showing the young how to nap a flake from a stone core, demonstrating the precise angle and force needed. Imagine them pointing out which berries were safe to eat and which were poisonous, or how to track a stegodon through the dense undergrowth. This shared learning created a cohesive culture that allowed the hobbits to exploit their environment efficiently and perpetuate their lineage. Historians still debate whether the stability of their tool technology indicates a relatively static cognitive capacity or simply a highly effective adaptation that didn't require constant innovation. A quirky or off-color fact to ponder is that perhaps the limited population size on the island, a common feature of island species, might have contributed to this stable cultural transmission. With fewer individuals, there might have been less internal pressure for rapid innovation or divergent cultural practices, favoring the reliable transmission of established survival skills. You could almost imagine their version of "don't fix what isn't broken" being a guiding principle for millennia. The enduring success of Homo floresiensis on floors for such an astonishing period is a testament to more than just their physical adaptations. It speaks volumes about their capacity for learning, teaching, and maintaining a viable culture. This consistent cultural transmission of knowledge and skills was just as vital as their island dwarfism in ensuring their remarkable long-term survival in their unique prehistoric world. You've explored the Hobbits' incredible journey, their unique adaptations, and their enduring culture on Flores. Now let's introduce a potentially dramatic element into their long saga, the possibility of their interactions with Homo sapiens. Kari, this isn't just about two species coexisting. It's about the potential meeting of two very different branches of the human family tree, a moment fraught with both wonder and peril. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, are known to have expanded out of Africa and into Southeast Asia and Australia tens of thousands of years ago. Archaeological evidence from Australia dates human presence there to at least 65,000 years ago, meaning Homo sapiens would have almost certainly passed through the Indonesian archipelago, including islands like Flores on their way. Given that the latest Homo floresiensis remains in tools date to around 50,000 years ago, though tools stretch back to 190,000 years, this creates a significant period of potential overlap between the hobbits and our own species. Imagine two vastly different humanoids, one perhaps a meter tall and the other your size, encountering each other in the ancient jungle. It's a scene straight out of a speculative fiction novel. What would these interactions have been like? Were they peaceful encounters or fraught with competition and conflict? The archaeological record from Liangbua itself shows that Homo sapiens occupied the cave after the disappearance of Homo floresiensis around 46,000 to 11,000 years ago. This suggests a succession rather than an immediate overlap within the cave. However, it doesn't rule out encounters elsewhere on the island or in the broader region. Historians still debate whether direct violent conflict, resource competition, or merely indirect ecological pressure from Homo sapiens contributed to the hobbits' ultimate extinction. The arrival of Homo sapiens would have introduced a new variable into the Flores ecosystem. We modern humans are incredibly adaptable, technologically innovative, and rapid colonizers. Our presence could have placed new pressures on the limited resources that Homo floresiensis relied upon. We hunted, we gathered, and we had our own advanced toolkits, arguably more versatile and efficient than the hobbits. Even if direct conflict was rare, competition for food sources like dwarf stegodon or specific plant resources could have been intense. A legitimate historical event that highlights such potential interactions is the extinction of Neanderthals in Europe around the time of Homo sapiens' arrival. A complex event often attributed in part to competitive pressures from modern humans. A quirky or off-color fact to consider is that the local folklore on Flores about the ebugogo, those small ape-like beings, often describes them as being able to mimic human speech and being highly intelligent, but also sometimes stealing food. While purely anecdotal, it's a fascinating thought to wonder if these myths are a very distant, culturally transmitted memory of encounters between Homo sapiens and Homo floresiensis. Perhaps some ancient Homo sapiens explorers returned home with tales of tiny, clever people. The nature of these potential interactions with Homo sapiens. remains one of the enduring mysteries surrounding Homo floresiensis. Did they meet? Did they coexist for a time? Did one simply outcompete the other for resources leading to the gradual decline of the hobbits, or was their disappearance unrelated to our arrival? The answers are crucial for understanding not just the fate of Homo floresiensis, but also the broader patterns of hominin dispersal and extinction in the late Pleistocene. It's a stark reminder that our own species, Homo sapiens, has been a formidable force in shaping the planet's ecosystems and the fate of other hominins, whether through direct contact or subtle long-term environmental pressures. You've pondered the potential interactions between the hobbits and our own kind. Now let's confront the inevitable question: what led to the disappearance of Homo floresiensis? Despite their remarkable adaptations and their long tenure on Flores, this unique species eventually vanished from the archaeological record. Their re-extinction theories are varied, complex, and often interconnected, reflecting the intricate dance between life and environment over vast stretches of time. It's like trying to figure out why a successful business suddenly shut down. Was it competition changing market conditions or an unexpected disaster? One prominent theory attributes their demise to environmental factors, specifically dramatic shifts in climate or catastrophic natural events. Flores, as we've noted, is a highly volcanic island nestled in a tectonically active region. Volcanic eruptions, even distant ones, can have devastating impacts, blanketing landscapes in ash, altering vegetation patterns, poisoning water sources, and triggering tsunamis or landslides. A particularly powerful eruption could have wiped out a relatively small, isolated population. Imagine a supervolcano erupting, plunging the island into a volcanic winter, or a massive ash cloud suffocating the very air they breathe. Another significant contender among the Norishwarnai's extinction theories is the impact of climate change. The late Pleistocene, the period during which Homo floresiensis existed and eventually disappeared, was characterized by dramatic fluctuations in global climate, including glacial cycles that led to significant changes in sea levels and temperature regimes. While an island like Flores wouldn't have been covered by ice sheets, these global shifts could have profoundly impacted its ecosystem. Changes in rainfall patterns could have altered the availability of plant and animal resources, or shifts in ocean currents could have affected fish stocks. A prolonged drought or a series of unusually severe wet seasons could have pushed a population reliant on specific resources beyond its tipping point. This is a legitimate historical event with global implications, as climate shifts have been implicated in numerous extinctions throughout Earth's history, affecting everything from megafauna to entire ecosystems. Then, of course, there's the specter of Homo sapiens. As discussed, modern humans arrived in Southeast Asia during the period when Homo floresiensis was still present. While direct conflict is difficult to prove, even indirect competition could have been a factor. If Homo sapiens were more efficient hunters, or exploited a wider range of resources, or simply reproduced at a faster rate, they could have gradually outcompeted the hobbits for the limited resources on the island. It's a subtle but relentless pressure, slowly squeezing a niche until it can no longer support a population. Historians still debate whether the arrival of Homo sapiens was the primary cause, a contributing factor, or entirely unrelated to the extinction of Homo floresiensis. It's also crucial to remember the inherent vulnerability of island species. Isolated populations often have smaller genetic diversity, making them less resilient to environmental shocks or disease. A single disease outbreak or a series of bad seasons could have had a disproportionately devastating effect on a small endemic population like the hobbits. A quirky or off-color fact to illustrate this fragility is that the last wild population of California condors, before a captive breeding program rescued them, dwindled to just 22 individuals, showing how close even resilient species can come to the brink. Ultimately, it's most likely that the extinction of Homo floresiensis wasn't due to a single cause, but a complex interplay of several factors. A major volcanic event, perhaps exacerbated by a period of climatic stress, followed by or coinciding with the arrival of a highly competitive new hominin species. Homo sapiens could have created a perfect storm that overwhelmed the hobbits' long-standing adaptations. Their story, therefore, becomes a poignant lesson in the fragility of even the most remarkably adapted species in the face of profound environmental and ecological change. Following the discussion of general extinction theories, let's zero in on one of the most compelling and dramatic natural culprits: volcanic activity. Flores is not just an island, it's a volcanic island part of the Ring of Fire, a region notorious for its geological volatility. This inherent instability means that volcanic eruptions have been a constant, powerful force shaping the island's landscape and influencing the lives of its inhabitants for millions of years. For the Hobbits, a major eruption wasn't just a distant geological event, it could have been an existential threat. Imagine a volcano, perhaps one of the giants like Mount Inari or Mount Ibalobos, rumbling to life. The immediate impact of a massive eruption can be catastrophic. Pyroclastic flows, superheated avalanches of gas and ash, incinerate everything in their path. Ashfall can smother vegetation, destroy water sources, and make the very air unbreathable, leading to widespread famine and respiratory illness. Earthquakes, often preceding or accompanying eruptions, can trigger landslides and collapse caves, including vital shelters like Liangbua. A legitimate historical event that tragically demonstrates the power of volcanic activity to wipe out populations is the volcanic eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE, which famously buried and preserved the Roman cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum, leaving behind casts of its victims. Evidence of past volcanic activity is abundant on Flores. Layers of volcanic ash are interspersed throughout the archaeological deposits at Liangbua, a testament to the island's fiery past. These ash layers, while excellent for dating purposes, also serve as a stark reminder of the environmental disruptions the Hobbits would have faced. While minor eruptions might have been a routine nuisance, a particularly large or sustained eruption could have pushed the relatively small Homo floresiensis population beyond its ability to recover. Consider the potential scale of impact. A widespread ashfall could have decimated the dwarf stegodon population, removing a critical food source for the Hobbits. It could have polluted their water supplies or destroyed forests where they gathered plant foods. Even if the Hobbits themselves survived the initial blast, the resulting ecological devastation could have led to starvation or forced them into unsustainable migrations across an already resource-limited island. Historians still debate whether the specific volcanic events identifiable in the archaeological record were directly responsible for the disappearance of Homo floresiensis, or merely contributed to a weakened state that made them more vulnerable to other pressures. A quirky or off-color fact is that some local legends on Flores even speak of mountains that eat people or spew fire, which could be ancient, distorted memories of particularly devastating eruptions from a time when people lived more intimately with the landscape's raw power. You can almost picture them watching a distant column of smoke and ash, a silent, terrifying omen. The dating of Homo floresiensis, its final appearance in the fossil record around 50,000 years ago, does coincide with a period of increased volcanic activity in the region. While it's challenging to link a single specific eruption directly to their extinction with absolute certainty, the cumulative impact of living in such a geologically volatile environment cannot be underestimated. It's plausible that a series of environmental catastrophes driven by volcanic activity could have fragmented their population, reduced their numbers, and ultimately led to their demise, leaving the island open for subsequent colonization by our own species. Their long run of survival on Flores was a testament to their resilience, but even the most resilient species can eventually succumb to the relentless forces of nature. Beyond the immediate explosive threat of volcanic eruptions, a more insidious, long-term environmental force that may have contributed to the Hobbit's demise is climate change. We often think of climate change as a modern phenomenon, but Earth's climate has been in constant flux for millions of years, particularly during the Pleistocene epoch, the very period Homo floresiensis called home. These ancient climatic shifts driven by natural cycles of glaciation and warming would have profoundly impacted the island ecosystem of Flores. During the ice ages, global temperatures plummeted, leading to the growth of massive ice sheets at the poles and high altitudes. This locked up vast amounts of water, causing global sea levels to drop sometimes by over 100 meters. While Flores itself never experienced glaciation, these sea level changes would have altered its geography. Lower sea levels could have expanded the island's coastline, potentially exposing more land area and perhaps even creating temporary land bridges to smaller nearby islets. But the deep Lombok Strait would have remained a significant barrier to the Asian mainland. Conversely, warming periods would have caused sea levels to rise, potentially shrinking Flores and reducing available land and resources. More importantly, global climate shifts would have impacted regional weather patterns on Flores. Changes in temperature, precipitation, and monsoon seasons could have significantly altered the island's vegetation and animal populations. Imagine a prolonged period of drought drying up critical water sources and killing off vital plant foods. Or perhaps an extended period of heavy rainfall leading to increased erosion flooding and a decline in preferred animal prey. These shifts, even subtle ones, could have disrupted the delicate ecological balance that Homo floresiensis had adapted to over hundreds of thousands of years. It's like slowly draining the battery on your phone. Eventually, it just dies. A legitimate historical event that underscores the profound impact of past climate change is the Younger Dryas event. A rapid return to glacial conditions about 12,900 to 11,700 years ago, which caused dramatic environmental upheaval and extinctions across the Northern Hemisphere. While this specific event occurred long after the Hobbits vanished, it illustrates the scale and speed at which ancient climate change could occur and its potential for ecological disruption. For a species like Homo floresiensis, so finely tuned to its specific island niche, even seemingly small climatic shifts could have had major consequences. If their primary food sources like the dwarf stegodon or certain plant species were particularly sensitive to changes in rainfall or temperature, their decline would directly impact the hobbits' survival. Their small population size and genetic isolation characteristics common to island species would have made them particularly vulnerable to such environmental stressors. They lacked the genetic diversity to quickly adapt to rapidly changing conditions or the ability to migrate to more favorable environments. Historians still debate whether the specific timing of the Hobbits' disappearance aligns perfectly with known major climatic shifts that would have significantly impacted Flores. A quirky or off-color fact is that some researchers have even speculated that severe El Niño Southern Oscillation, ENSO events which cause extreme weather fluctuations in the Pacific region might have become more frequent or intense around the time of the Hobbits' disappearance, adding another layer of climatic stress. You can almost picture them tiny and resilient, staring up at skies that no longer delivered the predictable rain or a sun that beat down with unusual intensity. Ultimately, climate change presents a compelling, albeit less dramatic, than a volcanic eruption explanation for the decline of Homo floresiensis. It highlights the vulnerability of specialized island populations to broad environmental forces, reminding us that even successful adaptations can be rendered obsolete when the world itself shifts beneath your feet. We've dissected the environmental pressures of volcanic activity and climate change. Now let's bring back a familiar character into the extinction narrative. Resource competition, particularly with the arrival of Homo sapiens. You've already considered the potential for direct interactions, but even without outright conflict, the struggle for finite food and territory could have been a decisive factor in the hobbit's demise. It's like two different species of squirrels trying to live in the same small park. Eventually, one is going to have a harder time finding nuts. Flores, despite its ecological uniqueness, has always been an island of limited resources. Homo floresiensis had adapted brilliantly to this reality, specializing in hunting, dwarf stegodon, and exploiting the local flora and fauna. They had perfected their niche over hundreds of thousands of years, a testament to their resilience. But what happens when a new, highly adaptable and technologically proficient competitor enters that carefully balanced ecosystem? Homo sapiens. Our own species is known for its remarkable flexibility, broad diet, and advanced tool-making capabilities. When modern humans arrived in Southeast Asia, they carried with them sophisticated hunting techniques, a diverse subsistence strategy, they could eat almost anything, and the ability to rapidly adapt to new environments. If Homo sapiens arrived on Flores during the period of overlap with Homo floresiensis, even if they didn't directly encounter the hobbits in battle, their presence alone could have created immense pressure. Imagine both species hunting the same dwarf, stegodon, or foraging for the same edible plants. Homo sapiens. With their larger brains, more complex social structures, and potentially more efficient hunting methods, might have simply outcompeted the hobbits. They could have harvested resources at a faster rate, or moved into the most productive areas of the island, leaving less for Homo floresiensis. This isn't about violence, it's about ecological squeeze. It's like two businesses selling the exact same product in a small town. The one with better marketing and a more efficient supply chain will likely win out in the long run. This concept of resource competition, leading to the extinction of one species over another, is a well-documented ecological phenomenon known as competitive exclusion. It's a legitimate historical event observed in numerous ecosystems around the world, from the displacement of native species by introduced ones to the historical decline of various hominin species in the face of the Homo sapiens expansion. For instance, the ultimate disappearance of the Neanderthals in Europe is often attributed in part to competitive pressures from modern humans. Historians still debate whether the intensity of resource competition would have been sufficient on its own to cause the extinction of Homo floresiensis, or if it acted as a weakening factor alongside environmental pressures like volcanic activity or climate change. It's rarely a single cause in extinction events. A quirky or off-color fact is that if both groups were after the same dwarf stegodon, perhaps there were even awkward silent standoffs, like two people reaching for the last bag of chips at the same time, before one group quietly decided to look for other snacks. So while direct conflict is speculative, the more subtle yet powerful force of resource competition cannot be overlooked in the Hobbit's extinction narrative. The arrival of Homo sapiens on Flores would have profoundly altered the delicate ecological balance that Homo floresiensis had maintained for so long. It served as a final, perhaps insurmountable challenge to their unique island-bound existence, ultimately contributing to their vanishing act from the stage of human evolution. We've explored the various pressures that might have contributed to the Hobbit's demise, from fiery volcanoes to competitive modern humans. Now let's tie it all together by emphasizing a foundational vulnerability that underlies all these factors, their endemic isolation. This isn't just a geographical description, it's an ecological state that made Homo floresiensis inherently susceptible to environmental changes and external pressures, regardless of their remarkable adaptations. Imagine a species that has evolved for hundreds of thousands of years on a single, relatively small island. Their entire existence is meticulously adapted to that specific island's resources, climate, and ecological dynamics. Their genes are tailored to exploit the dwarf stegodon, the unique plant life, and the specific rhythms of the Flores ecosystem. They are endemic, meaning found nowhere else on Earth. While this endemic status allowed for the fascinating phenomenon of island dwarfism and unique adaptations, it also created a profound fragility. It's like designing a car perfectly for driving on Mars. It would be incredibly efficient there, but utterly useless and quickly destroyed on Earth. The problem with endemic isolation is that it limits options. If a major volcanic eruption devastates their habitat, or a prolonged drought wipes out their food supply, where do they go? There's no mainland to retreat to, no adjacent similar environment to colonize. Their entire world is the island. A small isolated population also tends to have limited genetic diversity, making them less robust to new diseases or sudden environmental shifts. They lack the evolutionary wiggle room that larger, more widespread populations possess to adapt quickly to unforeseen challenges. A legitimate historical event that powerfully illustrates the vulnerability of endemic island species is the rapid and widespread extinction of thousands of bird species in the Pacific, following the arrival of humans and their associated invasive species, highlighting how isolation can quickly turn into a death trap. Furthermore, a small population, typical of island endemics, is always at higher risk of demographic stochasticity, random fluctuations in birth and death rates that can by chance alone lead to extinction, especially if numbers are already low due to other pressures. It's like a very small business, one bad quarter, one key employee leaving, and it could collapse, whereas a huge corporation can absorb much more disruption. Historians still debate whether The hobbit's population size ever recovered sufficiently after major environmental stressors, or if they were in a continuous state of low numbers, making them perpetually vulnerable. This vulnerability due to endemic isolation amplifies the impact of every other potential extinction factor. A volcanic eruption that a widespread continental species might recover from could be catastrophic for an isolated island population. Climate change that causes minor shifts elsewhere could completely disrupt the delicate balance on a small island. And the arrival of Homo sapiens, even if just through subtle competition, could be the final straw for a species already living on the edge of its ecological limits. A quirky or off-color fact is that some conservation biologists, when trying to protect highly endemic species today, often face the heartbreaking reality that some populations are simply too small or too specialized to be saved from the cumulative pressures of environmental change, almost as if nature has decided they've played their hand. So while we can point to volcanoes, climate, or competition, the overarching theme is that the very isolation that made Homo floresiensis so unique and allowed for their remarkable adaptations also sealed their fate. Their endemic isolation meant they had nowhere to run and nowhere to hide when their world began to change, making them profoundly vulnerable to the forces that ultimately led to their extinction. It's a poignant reminder of the double-edged sword of evolutionary specialization. You've traced the Hobbits' unique story from their origins to their demise, exploring the controversies and environmental forces that shaped their existence. But the narrative of Homo floresiensis isn't over. Far from it. The discovery of the Hobbits has ignited a persistent fire of curiosity and inquiry, driving intense and ongoing scientific efforts. This brings us to the exciting world of ongoing research that continues to unravel the mysteries of these remarkable hominins. The scientific journey is rarely about finding a definitive answer and moving on. It's about continuously asking new questions and refining our understanding. One major thrust of ongoing research involves re-examining the existing fossil evidence with ever more sophisticated technologies. This includes micro-CT scanning of bones to reveal internal structures, advanced morphometric analyses to compare precise shapes and proportions with a wider range of hominin and primate species, and even virtual reconstructions of brains based on endocasts. These detailed studies continue to reinforce the unique nature of Homo floresiensis and provide finer-grained insights into their locomotion, diet, and cognitive capabilities. It's like having a high-definition remaster of a classic film, revealing details you never noticed before. Another critical area is a further exploration and excavation on Flores and other islands in the Indonesian archipelago. While Liang Biwa has been incredibly productive, scientists are actively searching for other sites that might yield more Homo floresiensis remains or even older hominin fossils. The discovery of much older stone tools at Matameng on Flores dating back 700,000 years suggests that the ancestral population of the hobbits was present on the island much earlier than the Homo floresiensis remains themselves. This indicates a longer, more complex evolutionary history on Flores than initially thought, and fuels the hunt for those elusive, older skeletal remains. Finding even fragmentary bones from an earlier phase of their evolution would be a massive breakthrough. A legitimate historical event that continues to push the boundaries of Homo floresiensis. Research is the discovery and ongoing excavation of new archaeological sites on Flores and nearby islands like Sulawesi, revealing surprisingly early evidence of hominin presence and technological sophistication. Historians still debate whether the focus of future research should primarily be on finding more H. floresiensis remains or on understanding the broader ecological and environmental context of Wallacea during the Pleistocene. Both are, of course, vital. Researchers are also employing advanced paleo-environmental reconstruction techniques, analyzing pollen sediment cores and animal remains to paint a more detailed picture of the ancient Flores ecosystem, its climate, vegetation, and the specific food resources available to the hobbits over time. This helps contextualize their adaptations and their eventual disappearance. A quirky or off-color fact is that some paleontologists have even resorted to using drones and satellite imagery to identify potential new cave entrances and fossil-rich areas on Flores, almost like ancient alien hunters with modern tech. Finally, the theoretical work continues to evolve. New models are being developed to understand the precise mechanisms of island dwarfism, brain evolution in isolated contexts, and the complex interactions between different hominin species. The Hobbits continue to challenge and refine our understanding of what it means to be human and the incredible plasticity of our evolutionary lineage. The scientific community is a vibrant, interconnected web, constantly sharing data, debating interpretations, and pushing the boundaries of knowledge. You can almost feel the collective brainpower whirring as scientists across the globe continue to piece together the Hobbit puzzle. The story of Homo floresiensis is a living, breathing field of ongoing research. Every new discovery, every refined analysis adds another stroke to the portrait of this astonishing species, ensuring that the Hobbit remains a central, captivating figure in the grand narrative of human evolution. You've embarked on an extraordinary journey through the world of Homo floresiensis, from their surprising discovery and the initial controversies to the detailed scientific work that unveiled their unique adaptations, remarkable resilience, and eventual disappearance. Now, as our exploration draws to a close, let's reflect on the profound legacy and lessons that the Hobbit leaves for us, not just as scientists, but as fellow members of the Homo genus. Their story is more than just an academic curiosity. It's a mirror reflecting unexpected possibilities in our own evolutionary past and a cautionary tale for our future. Perhaps the most significant lesson from Homo floresiensis is the sheer plasticity and adaptability of the human lineage. For decades, our understanding of human evolution was largely linear, a steady march towards bigger brains, taller stature, and increasing technological complexity culminating in Homo sapiens. The Hobbits shattered this neat narrative. They showed us that our ancestors could shrink in size and astonishingly even in brain volume, while still maintaining complex tool-making, cooperative hunting, and fire use. This demonstrates that intelligence isn't solely about brain size. It's about efficiency, organization, and the capacity for learning and cultural transmission, regardless of the cranial volume. It forces us to reconsider what defines human and the many different paths evolution can take. You might feel a little less pressured about that brain food now. Their long-term survival on Flores for perhaps 150,000 years is another powerful testament to their success. They weren't just a brief anomaly. They were a thriving, stable population for an immense period far longer than our own species has existed in its modern form. This longevity highlights the effectiveness of their unique island adaptations and their ability to forge a sustainable existence within their ecological niche. It's a legitimate historical event in hominin evolution, showing that even seemingly primitive forms could be incredibly successful and enduring over vast timescales. The Hobbits also underscore the power of island environments as evolutionary laboratories. Flores, with its isolation and unique pressures, perfectly illustrates the island rule, demonstrating how endemic species can diverge dramatically from their mainland counterparts. This provides invaluable data for understanding broader ecological and evolutionary principles, reminding us that life finds a way to adapt to even the most constrained and unusual circumstances. It's a living textbook of natural selection in action, a quirky or off-color fact being that if Homo sapiens had landed on Flores and stayed for long enough, perhaps we too would eventually evolve into a miniature form, trading our iPhones for perfectly napped mini hand axes. Finally, the story of Homo floresiensis serves as a poignant reminder of the fragility of highly specialized species, especially those in isolated environments. Despite their millennia of success, the Hobbits ultimately succumbed to a combination of environmental pressures and potentially the arrival of a new highly competitive species, our own. Their extinction is a sober lesson for modern conservation efforts, highlighting the vulnerability of endemic island populations to rapid climate change, habitat destruction, and invasive species. As you conclude this journey, take a moment to reflect on the image of these small, resilient beings. They challenge our assumptions, broaden our understanding, and enrich the tapestry of human history in unexpected ways. The Glacial legacy and lessons of Homo floresiensis continue to resonate, urging us to remain open-minded about the possibilities of our past and to recognize the intricate, often unpredictable dance of evolution. Their whispers from Liangbua echo not just a scientific discovery, but a profound reevaluation of what it truly means to be human. As the imagined echoes of the Liangbua cave fade, we are left with the profound and humbling story of Homo floresiensis, the Hobbit. This journey has taken us through the scientific saga of their discovery, from initial disbelief to the gradual acceptance of their unique place in our family tree. We've seen how the isolated island of Flores, with its limited resources and absence of large predators, acted as an evolutionary crucible, shrinking not only ancient elephants, but also these remarkable hominins to a mere meter in height. Despite their chimpanzee-sized brains, the hobbits wielded sophisticated stone tools, possibly mastered fire, and successfully hunted formidable prey, challenging our long-held assumptions about the direct correlation between brain size and intelligence. The intense debate surrounding their classification, were they a distinct species or diseased modern humans, ultimately yielded to overwhelming anatomical and archaeological evidence, reinforcing their status as a unique branch of the Homo genus, likely descended from Homo erectus, and having made an incredible sea journey to reach Flora. Their long tenure on the island, spanning hundreds of thousands of years, speaks to their adaptability and effective cultural transmission. Yet their very endemic isolation, combined with potential climate shifts, volcanic activity, and the eventual arrival of Homo sapiens, likely contributed to their ultimate disappearance around 50,000 years ago. The ongoing research at Liangbua and beyond continues to deepen our understanding, revealing the incredible plasticity of human evolution and reminding us of the fragility of specialized species in a dynamic world. The Hobbits stand as a poignant testament to the diverse paths of life, urging us to look beyond simplistic narratives and embrace the full, astonishing complexity of our shared evolutionary past. Good night.